This man right here was the most feared coach in the NBA. From defeating 3 of the greatest teams ever assembled, to his team winning back-to-back championships by physically destroying their opponents, Chuck Daly didn't just compete with NBA legends, he crushed them. His ruthless strategy and so-called dirty tactics forced superstars like Michael Jordan to not only completely reinvent their playstyle, but also absolutely despise his teams. Yes, Chuck was controversial to say the least, but how did he even get to this point? Well, to answer this, we have to go back to the dawn of the NBA, where one man was concerned with only one thing: winning championships at any cost. In 1955, a young coach named Chuck Daly took his first steps into the world of basketball leadership at Punxsutawney High School. Little did anyone know that this humble beginning would set the stage for one of the most feared and respected coaching careers in NBA history. After over 8 seasons in high school, Daly wasn't content merely coaching at that level. He had bigger dreams and the drive to achieve them. In '63, Daly made the leap to college basketball, joining Vic Bubba's staff at Duke University as an assistant. And that is a fun name to say. At Duke, Daly's coaching ability began to shine. He played a key role in guiding the team to conference championships and deep playoff runs. These early successes hinted at the coaching genius that was beginning to emerge, as college success can do but does not always do. His ascension to the NBA was slow but measured, much like his career would be, eventually taking over a head coaching job at Boston College in 1969, and his impact was immediate and, as some say, without hesitation. He took a team that had gone 11-13 and improved them to 15-11. Not a huge swing, but it shows his ability to quickly turn around programs, and this would be the secret trick he'd need to succeed in the NBA. But being able to swing teams around isn't the only thing you need. You need to be able to construct them and understand how the pieces fit together. So when he was at the University of Pennsylvania in the 70s, his teams were an absolute force to be reckoned with. While these teams of his would have deep playoff runs and great regular seasons, that wasn't the most impressive part. By 1978, all 5 starters on that team had originally been recruited by Daly. This showcased his exceptional talent development skills and roster construction. For this reason, U-76's head coach Billy Cunningham, an NBA legend, would hire him as his assistant. But this would allow him to develop his professional game. After being so long in college and high school, the experience would prove invaluable in his journey to becoming one of the most feared coaches. But at this stage, he showed no likelihood of creating such a dominant force. But the 76ers' tactical success was credited to Daly, and this would open the door for him to be the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. Yeah, there's no point highlighting that. They had like 4 coaches that year. They promoted him. He went 9-32. He was fired as well. This was a travesty, and it looked like, hey, maybe you're just simply destined to be an assistant. But what if someone would step up and say, we like what you're about, we want you to construct our team and fix our losing ways? To say that when Daly arrived in 1983, Detroit was struggling would be the biggest understatement in the history of understatements. They had lost 60-plus games 2 seasons in a row. They hadn't had back-to-back winning seasons since the mid-1950s. The Pistons lacked identity, direction, and most importantly, winning culture. And if you've never won, you wouldn't have it. But Daly was motivated to extract the most out of players where others saw hopelessness. The seeds had already started growing, with Isaiah Thomas being drafted in 1981, and he would become one of the greatest NBA point guards to ever play. They would also trade for Bill Laimbeer, a brutally vicious player who is definitely the utmost villain in NBA history. Truly, he is hated by everybody outside of Detroit.
Laimbeer, Barkley gets in the left. Laimbeer will come back with an uppercut.
Now, what made Daly the right man for this monumental task? And how could you win in the Eastern Conference with such powerhouses as Don Nelson's Bucks, Larry Bird's Celtics, and Dr. J's 76ers? Well, it was his unique blend of experience, adaptability, and leadership. Unlike a lot of coaches that just get thrusted into NBA opportunities, he had cooked his skills like a brisket. He had seen basketball from every angle, and he had seen what a badly run organization is when he was with the Cavaliers. Each of these expectations had taught him valuable lessons that were now ready to be applied. And all of these things kind of motivate you as a coach a lot more. He knew that to turn this team around, he needed to instill a new culture, one built in toughness, defensive intensity, and a never-say-die attitude. Now, a lot of people say, well, that's obvious, except that wasn't necessarily how he set out to create this defensive mindset. He mentioned, when I was hired, they wanted me to do something about the Pistons' defense. Frankly, I wasn't sure what I could do. They won 39 and 37 games 2 years before I got there. I looked at those tapes and I thought they did a good job. I didn't know how I could improve on it. but I had a contract with 2 guaranteed years and an option for another year. And if they wanted me to work on the defense, I'd work on the defense. Most NBA coaches have a lot of friction with their higher-ups at this stage. You know, Don Nelson. But not Daly. He was willing to get to work. So how do you change the mentality of a franchise accustomed to losing? How do you convince players to buy into a system that demands maximum effort on every possession? And how would he use this to destroy dynasties? Well, as the Pistons' new identity took shape in his first season, it was still an absolute far cry from the most feared team and coach in history. Chuck Daly carefully constructed the Bad Boys roster with the front office, but it would only be in a few years' time where they would own that name. However, Daly's carefully orchestrated trades and draft picks that aligned with his philosophy and created synergy with the pieces he already had would be the trick. And here's the key. In his first year, they won 12 more wins than the previous year. They made the playoffs in his very first season with them. They would lose in the first round, but for a team that had not expected this, they were pretty happy. However, this was all about Chuck Daly's slow grind to the top. He wasn't just assembling a team, he was creating the force of nature that would terrorize opponents across the league.
You're not going to win it offensively. You've got to get to work everybody defensively. That's what I'm looking at. I got to have the defense.
But there was a twist to this. When you looked at the stats, you'd see that they were a top-ranked offensive team and a not very good defensive team. This probably explains why they made the playoffs again in 1985, but would meet and lose to the Boston Celtics, the defending champions at the time. Alright, so teams with bad defense aren't feared and they don't actually win in the playoffs. So how do you go from playoff dropout to defensive bully? And would this work on Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, and Michael Jordan? After 1985's loss in the playoffs, it went beyond just single trades. He wanted that defensive talent and he needed a way to find it. Hey, the draft. Joe Dumas, drafted in 1985, would become that defensive nightmare. Would this singular addition be enough? No, it would not. They would flame out to Doc Rivers and the Atlanta Hawks, who, with the legend Dominique Wilkins, were simply way more athletic. Daly's singular tactic of brilliance came after this 1986 loss. He realized and had the light bulb moment for what he would need to do. He knew the league's rhythm was upbeat, as NBA teams topped 110 points per game. He also realized that teams shrank the court come playoff time and made half-court skirmishes the norm. If you had to play that way in the playoffs, why not just do it in the regular season, he wondered. Why play one style for 82 games, then change it all around for the playoffs? The more I thought about it, the more I knew that slowing down the tempo was the way to go back then. Everybody wanted to run up and down the court and put up those big numbers. By slowing it down, we could frustrate the rest of the league. Our identity was going to be our defense. We simply wanted to score about 100 points a night. Our goal was to play every game as if it were a playoff game. It was time for Daly to finally construct the Bad Boys. It was time to become feared. For this, he needed hustle, defense, rebounding, and maybe a little crazy. John Salley and Dennis Rodman were picked in the 1986 draft. They added that intensity and the athleticism they lacked to their team. These weren't just good players, they were the perfect pieces for the Detroit Pistons and Daly. He now had a team that could suffocate opponents with the defensive pressure and intimidate them with their physicality. But how do you now get these diverse personalities to buy into a system that's completely different than the rest of the NBA, like how you can consider buying into the GOAT authority by subscribing? Don't forget, Isaiah Thomas had played in the early offensive versions of this team, so swapping mantras while still having the same star player is not always easy for a coach. Daly's genius lay in his ability to create a team identity that his players could rally behind. As Isaiah Thomas put it,
the media always gave us the physically tough label, but we always described ourselves as mentally tough. You win with smart people, you win with people who don't make mistakes, make sacrifices, and then you try to go out and win the basketball game with it. And fortunately enough for us, we had a lot of players that wanted to do that.
While Detroit was physical and a bit over the line and intense, it had not yet entered the physicality that would warrant dirty tactics. But it was very clear that this was the direction they needed to go in order to generate fear and victory. It was about breaking the will of anyone who dared to challenge them. The results? Well, the Bad Boys' defensive strategy was unlike anything the league had seen before. They pressured opponents across the entire 94-foot court. Full hustle, full intensity for the entire game. Every game. This relentless approach wore down opponents physically and mentally, making every game against the Pistons a grueling experience. And at the heart of this defensive juggernaut was obviously the one and only Dennis Rodman. He embodied everything the Bad Boys stood for, later winning consecutive Defensive Player of the Year awards in 1989 and 1990. His ability to guard multiple positions and probably be the best rebounder of all time, Wilt, gave Daly incredible flexibility in his defensive schemes. But Rodman wasn't alone in his defensive excellence. Joe Dumars, who was selected a few years prior, was considered by Michael Jordan as the best defender he ever faced. He formed an elite defensive backcourt with Isaiah Thomas, and this duo could disrupt even the most potent offensive attacks, turning games into defensive slugfests that played right into Detroit's hands. However, even Magic Johnson would not go as far as to say this was not basketball.
Did you think that was basketball?
Yes, only because Isaiah and Joe still had finesse and
Right.
Was it tough to play against it? Of course.
Right.
Bill Laimbeer and Rick Mahorn became the enforcers, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable defense.
Because he was a dirty player. You know, he was one of them guys, you shoot a jumper, he tried to slide his foot underneath your ankle so you twist your ankle. And
I hated Bill Laimbeer just as much as Jordan, but it was Mahorn, man. Mahorn had a crazy look in his eye all the time. Mahorn's going to take you out.
Their fear was mounting. Their physical, intimidating style of play would make opponents think twice before playing the Pistons and gave them that psychological edge before the games even began. Daly's genius was in how he balanced all of these elements and also had them focused on the long-term goal, simply improving every season by a little bit, more wins, deeper in the playoffs. He didn't just unleash his players, he channeled their aggression and intensity into this cohesive system. And as Isaiah Thomas emphasized, we prided ourselves on marching like soldiers, acting as one unified group. This wasn't just a team anymore. It was a well-oiled machine designed for defensive dominance. Their style of play was so effective and disruptive that it forced other teams to adapt or be beaten out of the game. But now the physicality had become such that it was considered dirty tactics by everyone watching. It always kinda was, despite how it was described. And Daly didn't want it to be dirty, but when you encourage your team to play this way and never call it out, it is being done under your leadership. When bullies, brutality, elbow to the head, these are words that come up in articles describing the play style, the fear from the rest of the NBA was justified. The fear they wished to instill, that wasn't towards just players.
But we wanted to crush you mentally. We wanted the fans to feel fear.
As the Bad Boys' reputation grew, so did the anticipation for their matchups against the league's elite teams. How would they fare against the high-powered offenses of the Celtics and the Lakers, and the upcoming Michael Jordan? Much like Daly's own career, the Pistons' rise to prominence wasn't immediate. Daly and Thomas had been building since 1983, chipping away, shifting their focus, finding weaknesses in themselves and their super teams. And in 1987, on the way to the playoffs, the Pistons would finally win 52 games in the regular season, setting them up as a contender in the playoffs and also for a matchup against the Boston Celtics. They would make the Eastern Conference Finals against them, and it was time to get revenge for 1985. The series was competitive and tied at 2-2, and Game 5 at the Boston Garden would prove to be a crucial moment. With seconds remaining, the Pistons were on the verge of stealing a crucial road win, but in a moment of chaos, Isaiah Thomas failed to see Daly's timeout signal. The resulting turnover led to a dramatic steal by Larry Bird and a game-winning layup by the Celtics. It was a gut-wrenching loss, the kind that would break a lesser team's spirit. After all, that's what the Celtics were good at and had done that to the Lakers in 1984 as well. And we saw how Magic Johnson responded in 1985 for his revenge. That was thanks to Pat Riley. Daly, in these moments, would prove himself to be one of the greatest coaches of all time. He didn't let his team crumble. Instead, he used the loss as a teaching moment, showed his players what it would take to overcome a team like the Celtics. The Pistons bounced back in Game 6, won at home, and forced a decisive Game 7 back in Boston. Though they ultimately lost this series, the Pistons had served notice to the rest of the league. The Bad Boys weren't just upstarts anymore, they were legitimate contenders. And here's the key to Daly's mystique. He let his players be themselves. No matter how rough and intense, this is part of what made him a fearful leader, but he wasn't as a man or a coach. He just allowed the team to have the personality it needed to win. From the outside, it would not appear that way. But don't get it wrong, the Bad Boys embraced their coach's tough mentality through and through. This was his team to lead. The following year, Daly's team would win 54 games, 2-game increase, but sadly there was a pesky young prolific scorer standing in the way of Detroit and Boston. Michael Jordan was already known as the first volume scorer, and there were very specific methods that Daly would have to create in order to keep his team rolling. Now, in later series against Chicago, these rules would become significantly more profound and important to discuss, even though his team would never discuss it. But in this particular series, they would very easily destroy them 4-1. Jordan and the Pistons, this battle would come later. Right now, Detroit had a mission to take on and take over the Boston Celtics. Their hatred for each other as teams grew so intense that it actually bordered on personal. Bill Laimbeer, never one to shy away from confrontation, would deliberately provoke the Celtics before games. He'd walk to center court, spit on the leprechaun logo, and smear it with his sneakers. Anybody that knows anything about Boston equals, that's not gonna be received well. And in 1988, not only were Boston the best offense in the league, Detroit were considered the best defense in the league. Even if technically they were the second most efficient, close enough, they were considered the best. Time for the Eastern Conference Finals once again. The Celtics, who had averaged 114 points per game in the regular season, only reached 100 once. Daly's tactical wits were on full display in the Pistons' battles with the Celtics. He recognized that to beat Boston, they needed to match their physicality, the original bad boys, and disrupt any rhythm they had to score. They had done this. They had become legendary. It was pure dominance. They destroyed the Celtics, won the Eastern Conference Finals, and in a moment that ended the Celtics' legendary run and started another legendary run of their own, the Pistons were ready to challenge for a championship.
We are getting ready for Game 1 of the 1988 NBA Finals. An old face and a new face.
The glitz and glamour of the Showtime Lakers were about to meet their match in Chuck Daly's gritty Detroit Pistons. One super team taken down, another super team to go. As the 1988 Finals approached, the contrast between these two teams could not have been bigger. The Lakers, with their fast-paced, high-flying offense, had dominated the league in the 80s. But the Pistons were a different breed entirely, a team built on toughness, defense, and a disturbing motivation to win. Daly knew he was facing an uphill battle, though. The Lakers roster was stacked with talent, featuring legends like Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, James Worthy, led by the Godfather Pat Riley. And Daly acknowledged this talent disparity, stating, "If we and the Lakers lined up next to each other 5-on-5, position by position, we come out on the short end. They're studs. They make us look like a mongrel team." But Daly had a plan. He wasn't going to try and beat the Lakers at their own game. He already understood this. Instead, he was going to slow them down and grind them into submission, much like the Celtics had attempted to do. Well, not attempted, they had succeeded. But the Lakers had overcome this with their own toughness. So the defensive strategy of the Pistons was built on an extreme physical play and intimidation. They weren't going to guard the Lakers. They were going to punish them.
You guys' game plan was basically to beat my ass. That was kind of it.
But you didn't miss any jump shots. That was the thing that pissed us off. Magic was magic, and Worthy is unstoppable, and Kareem is going to go into the skyhook.
This wasn't about playing dirty. Daly never wanted to do that. It was about setting a tone and making the Lakers uncomfortable. Now, most of the league would disagree and definitely feared the amount of physicality Daly's team would bring.
When you played them boys from the Pistons, we used to always say, call your family, tell them you love them, and goodbye. Because there was a chance you wasn't going to make it out. They were trying to hurt people.
But despite all of this, the series became an instant classic, with both teams trading blows over 7 intense games. The defining moment came in Game 6 when Isaiah Thomas famously scored 25 points in the third quarter on a severely sprained ankle, representing their absolute desire to conquer. Yet despite Detroit's valiant effort, the Lakers narrowly triumphed in Game 7, securing back-to-back titles and becoming a truly dominant legacy with 5 titles in the 1980s. But Isaiah Thomas didn't always agree with the Lakers' triumph. Much like everything else about the Bad Boys, they had to work hard and work harder in order to truly achieve their dreams. They were now hungrier than ever and one of the few teams in NBA history that improved every year under their coach at this point. 1989 would be no different. 54 wins, try 63 wins, and second in league defense again. Everyone thought they were the best defense anyway. And what it set them up for was a finals rematch with the Lakers, who were looking for a three-peat. A flag with the name Detroit Bad Boys was waved around at the start of Game 1, and for the Lakers, this would make them question the intensity of their opponent, their desire, and the answer to that would not be something you'd want to face. As the series progressed, Daly's strategy began to pay dividends. The Lakers, accustomed to running teams off the court, found themselves really bogged down in a super physical, low-scoring affair. The Pistons set a playoff record for the fewest points allowed, allowing just 92.9 points per game. This is crazy considering teams were regularly scoring over 110 points per game on average. This was Daly's vision come to life, a suffocating defense that could neutralize even the greatest offense of the decade. As the series wore on, fortune seemed to favor Daly's Pistons. The Lakers were hit hard by injuries. Byron Scott missed the entire series. Magic Johnson got hurt in Game 2. But great teams capitalize on opportunities, and that's exactly what Daly's Pistons did. The result? A stunning sweep. The Pistons defeated the Lakers 4-0, ending their dynasty and claiming their first championship. It was the moment for the franchise and a crowning achievement for Daly. Now, Magic has no doubts they would have won if he weren't injured. They blamed Pat Riley for the hard practices before the finals, but Isaiah Thomas would hear none of it because he was injured the year before and guarantees they would have won that one. It's about the opportunities, making the most of the moment. Joe Dumars' performance would earn him the finals MVP, and in the aftermath of the victory, Daly emphasized the team's defensive effort, saying, "All that on the defensive end was hard work. We deserved the championship." It was a simple statement that represented everything Daly had built in Detroit. A team that outworked and out-hustled their opponents, no matter how talented. They were not afraid of the lights and of the egos. Now, as everybody around the league understood, the Bad Boys Pistons were aggressive, rough, and many had gone on to say that they did not deserve their championships. But Magic, he wouldn't have it, and he was giving them credit.
I never take anything away from a champion.
Right.
And so they proved that style could win.
Right.
And they won with it, and so give them credit.
However, during this run, the methods would continue to go overboard. In a 1990 game versus 76ers after a foul made by Rodman, the Sixer team made a taunting response. Not a big deal, right? But then Bill Laimbeer enters and shoves a ball into his face, and a full-out brawl ensues. This shows that the brutality and physicality was and had been outside of pure playing tactics. For Laimbeer, this had always been his thing. But for the Bad Boys, it was harder to justify at this point in time that these tactics were a clean way of playing. However, the NBA had never seen anything like Michael Jordan. His aerial acrobatics, his clutch performances, and sheer will to win were redefining what was possible. But as Jordan's Bulls rose to prominence, one man stood in their way: Chuck Daly, the feared coach who had taken down dynasties and was now starting his own. He had created what they called the Jordan rules to stop MJ, but could he use them again? And would this ability to keep the greatest player of all time on the ground give Detroit the opportunity for a repeat championship? Now, have you ever wondered if Michael Jordan and the Bulls could have had more championships? He has, many have, but the Detroit Bad Boys have kind of got in the way of that. In 1988, they defeated him very easily in the playoffs, and in 1989, on their way to their title, they also defeated him. These rules that Daly had for Michael Jordan, they were the ultimate manifestation of the Pistons' defense. Daly openly stated Jordan is embarrassing the league. This was after only 2 of his 7 consecutive scoring titles, so Detroit knew they would have to be very, very physical, but more physical with him than anybody else.
Jordan rules were for the Pistons to know about, not for anybody else to know about.
The Jordan rules, is that something you guys made up?
At this point, it was clear that Michael Jordan's claim that they were trying to beat the shit out of him was accurate, with Rodman even admitting to wanting to physically hurt Jordan. The intense, physical, and tough defense was now hated and viewed as too far for basketball. It was dirty, and without it, they could not win, or so claimed many. Articles have looked back and simply called them Detroit's goons. However, it wasn't just about being physical and nailing him when he went off a screen and such things. There was also more intricate understanding to it that Isaiah Thomas has explained.
Send him left. And you as a defender, your job is to take away his right hand. Now we want that pass going in the air across court. Jordan didn't want to pass, so what would he do? He would shoot.
I'll shoot it, yeah.
Let's say he beats all the double teams, right? Now he gets to the basket. We gonna foul you.
Red zone.
And put you on the foul line.
Daly elaborated further. The other rule was, anytime he went by you, you had to nail him. If he was coming up a screen, nail him. We didn't want to be dirty, I know some people thought we were, but we had to make contact and we had to be very physical. Daly openly acknowledged this is how they had to play against Jordan in order to stifle him. Daly's strategy here against the Bulls was without a doubt psychological warfare. Yes, it did include some sense of analytics, forcing Jordan to go left, but they mostly wanted him to feel their presence on every possession. They rotated multiple defenders with different approaches to keep him off balance. Joe Dumars would use his quick feet and active hands to pass to Jordan on the perimeter. Dennis Rodman would use his length and strength to body him up, and if Jordan managed to get past them, he'd find himself facing a wall of bad boys ready to deliver a really hard foul. This approach wasn't just about stopping Jordan's scoring, it was about making him question every move he made on the court. And by extension, if you make Michael Jordan do that, what are other teams going to think? The Jordan rules weren't limited to defense either. Daly knew that to truly neutralize his airness, they had to wear him down over the course of a game. So the Pistons targeted him relentlessly on offense as well. They'd run plays specifically designed to make Jordan work hard on defense and really try to tire him out for those crucial fourth quarter moments. What made the Jordan rules so effective wasn't just their design, but the personnel Daly had to implement them. This was Daly's genius in execution. He had created a system that perfectly matched his team's strengths and exploited his opponent's very limited vulnerabilities. As the Pistons and Bulls had battled in the playoffs year after year, the effectiveness of the Jordan rules became clear. The Pistons eliminated Chicago in the 1988 Eastern Conference semifinals, then again in 1989. And as defending champions, if they wanted back-to-back championships, they would have to do it again in the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals. Boston was no more, Chicago was the next hurdle, and each series was a brutal physical affair that pushed Jordan to his limits. Much like the story of the Detroit Pistons and the Boston Celtics, the Bulls would really push back this time and it would go to Game 7, but they would be limited to just 73 points as the Detroit Bad Boys would go and head to their third NBA Finals in a row. Jordan did average 32 points for the series, but they were not able to overcome the physicality and the intensity that Chuck Daly's team had on their way to a second back-to-back championship. They had destroyed all of the dynasties of the 80s. They had prevented Michael Jordan's ascension. And guess what? When the dust settled on their second consecutive championship, the Detroit Pistons entered the 1990-1991 season where their sights set on an unprecedented three-peat. They had stopped Pat Riley's team from achieving that. How dominant would it be if they could then achieve it on the back of their denial? However, how long could the Detroit Pistons stay on top? It was very clear in this season that they would not have the same ability in the two previous ones. Age and wear and tear began to take their toll on the team's core players. Their physical style of play that had brought them so much success was starting to exact a heavy price. Isaiah Thomas, the heart and soul of the Bad Boys, was battling nagging injuries that would significantly impact his performance throughout the season. Meanwhile, Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls were in the dungeon figuring out their rise to power, much like Chuck Daly had done in the 80s on his way to a Hall of Fame stretch. However, Daly recognized the changing landscape and attempted to evolve the team's strategy. You want to be a GOAT coach, you have to be able to adapt, and it was clear that the Bad Boys' physicality needed to change. He tried to incorporate more offensive fluidity into their game plan, hoping to reduce the physical toll on his aging roster. However, the Pistons struggled to maintain their defensive intensity while adapting to these offensive changes. The result was a team caught between two identities. Despite this, as the double defending champions, they weren't going down without a fight, obviously. The stage was set for an epic Eastern Conference Finals showdown with Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls. The basketball world held its breath, anticipating another brutal series between these fierce rivals. Could the Pistons summon one last burst of championship magic, or would the rising Bulls finally overcome their long-term nemesis? What transpired over the next 4 games would shock the NBA today. The Bulls, led by a transcendent Michael Jordan, dismantled the Pistons utterly and totally. Chicago's improved offense under Phil Jackson and the Triangle allowed the Jordan rules to have no power, and the Bad Boys didn't have the physicality to enact them at that level anymore. They also had a suffocating defense that would overpower the newer style offense that the Pistons were running. The final blow came in a 115-94 Game 4 rout, completing a stunning sweep of the once invincible Bad Boys. Greatness finds a way. Jordan and the Bulls studied the Pistons, adapted their game to counter the Jordan rules. They all added muscle to withstand the physical punishment. They got a protector for Michael Jordan, and they improved their outside shooting to punish the interior defense of Detroit. And most importantly, Jordan himself evolved, becoming a more willing passer and learning to trust his teammates in crucial moments, while still shooting a ridiculous amount and being the leading scorer in the league. It's worth noting that these rules are why Michael Jordan hates Isaiah Thomas and the Bad Boys to this day.
Oh, I hated him. And yeah, he carries even to this day. They made it personal. They physically beat the shit out of us.
But Jordan was the only one still crying today. They hit it hard, they fouled hard, it was dirty. Look what they did, they showed you.
And despite Chuck Daly being the feared coach of this most feared team, Michael Jordan actually got to spend time with Chuck Daly when he coached the Dream Team, and his perception changed.
Chuck was great. I mean, I had some reservations about Chuck because we played against him, and he was that mountain. So the more I got of him, the more I wanted to hang out with him. And
in spite of the fact that the Bad Boys went over the line with everybody in the league, and they have been considered dirty tactics, Daly as a man and as a coach was insanely well respected, to the point that even Charles Barkley, after playing on the Dream Team, said, "I can't believe this is the guy who coached the damn Bad Boys." And while his do-whatever-it-takes approach became highly controversial, it showed that he was ruthless in the way he wanted to win. And even though he didn't win Coach of the Year, his success and win rate in Detroit has him in the Hall of Fame. In his 13 full seasons as an NBA head coach, he qualified for the playoffs 12 times, showcasing remarkable consistency. As Daly famously said, "I don't coach basketball with the Pistons, I coach people." In a way, the Pistons' brutal defensive strategy helped create the Michael Jordan we remember as the greatest of all time. But naturally, the downfall of Daly in the Eastern Conference Finals to the Bulls would signal the rise of Phil Jackson, and who would create teams that were almost the opposite of the bad boys, but he would win 11 titles. Click to learn how he did it.